droite.
Voilà, par ici, s'il vous plaît. Voilà, Léa, s'il vous plaît.
Et après, c'est votre droite.
Voilà, ici. Enter the middle, please. On est peut-être franco-français. Léa, s'il vous plaît.
Look in the left, please.
Voilà.
Look to the right, please. To the right.
Look in the left, please.
Par ici.
Look in the left.
Voilà, s'il vous plaît, tous les trois par ici. Voilà. Voilà, hop, pas s'il vous plaît. Donc voilà, par là, c'est bien, merci. Par ici.
And to the left.
S'il vous plaît. Léa, s'il vous plaît.
D'accord.
Voilà, par ici. Léa, s'il te plaît.
Yeah.
Voilà, tous les trois ensemble.
Voilà, une dernière ici, tous les trois.
Partez pas trop loin pour revenir. Voilà, par ici, s'il vous plaît.
Voilà, un petit regard par là.
To the left.
Là, tous les deux ici.
Look in the left, please.
Léa, voilà, on commence par ici.
Look in the left, please.
Par ici.
Look in the left, please.
Léa, s'il vous plaît.
Look in the left.
Là.
Look in the left, please.
Là. Petit regard ici, s'il vous plaît. Oui.
Voilà, un petit
To
regard
the
par là.
left. To the left to me, please. Yes. And look at the left.
And again this way. Look in the left, please.
Voilà, encore ici.
Look in the left, please. Looking up.
And to the left, please. To the left. To the left, please.
Ici. Hop, allez. Hop, pas trop près. Voilà, merci. Par ici, s'il vous plaît. Encore un petit regard ici. Merci. Voilà. Allô, allô.
Look in the left, please.
Please look at me. Please.
Voilà. S'il te plaît,
Look in the left, please.
Voilà, un petit regard par là.
Look in the left, please. Look in the left.
Ah oui. Oh, il est échappé. Voilà. Allez, on commence ici.
Please look to the corner, please. To the corner.
Madame.
Voilà,
par ici. Par ici, s'il vous plaît.
là en bas.
Please look to the left.
Look in the left, please. Look in the
Et
left,
on
please.
commence par ici.
Please
S'il vous
turn to
plaît,
the left,
on commence
please.
ici.
Turn to the left, please.
Look in the left, please.
Voilà, regardez ensemble de ce que vous avez.
Voilà.
Oh, voilà, Paris.
Look in here, please.
Un petit regard par là.
Look in here, please.
Le regard par la côte droite. Voilà.
And to the left here.
Toutes les deux. Merci.
Look in here, please.
Ja, sehr schön, danke.
Look in here, please.
Lea, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Swiss filmmaker Ursula Meyer presented her second film today at the competition. She became very known with her surprise hit Home, starring Isabelle Huppert. Her new film is called Sister and tells the story of 12-year-old Simon, who simply invents his own life. He lives in a skiing resort at the expense of tourists, whom he exploits and occasionally robs. This film focuses on the great issue as to how social drama can be narrated. One possibility is to simply present the acting figures in their distress. The other one is to dive into the lives of these people and to try to picture it. That is something that Ursula Meyer is really a master at. This is the press conference for her competition film Sister.
Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to welcome you to the press conference for the competition entry Sister.
Und ich möchte Ihnen gerne die Beteiligten hier vorne
Let me introduce the panel.
Vorstellen. Ganz außen sitzt Agnès
Right at
Godard,
the end
die
is
Kamerafrau.
Agnès Godard, the camera woman or photographer.
Neben ihr hat Platz
Next
genommen
to her
Antoine Jacot, der
is Antoine
Drehbuchautor.
Jacot, the scriptwriter.
Neben ihm die
Next to
Hauptdarstellerin
him
Lea Seydoux.
Is Lea Seydoux, the lead actress.
Und dann Ursula Meyer,
And
die
then we come
Regisseurin.
to Ursula Meyer, the director.
An ihrer Seite Casey
Next to her,
Klein,
Casey
Darsteller.
Mottet-Klein, the lead actor.
Es ist zu uns gekommen die Produzentin Ruth Waldburger
And then we have Ruth Waldberger, producer.
und der Co-Produzent
And
Dennis
finally,
Freit.
Dennis Freit, co-producer.
Herzlich willkommen in Berlin.
Welcome to
Nun
Berlin.
bitte ich um Ihre Fragen.
I'd like now to open the floor to your questions, ladies and gentlemen.
Hallo, Martina Hafner von der BZ.
Martina Hafner von
Herr
EBZ.
Mottet-Klein, ich würde gerne wissen, wie alt Sie sind und wie Sie in diesen
Mr.
Film
Mottet-Klein,
geraten
how
sind
old
und
are you? How
wie
did
die
you
Arbeit
get
war.
into this film and what was the work like for you?
Ça marche pas?
Ich habe 13 Jahre alt und
I'm 13. What was the work on this film like for you? Was it hard? Were you an experienced actor? Did you have acting experience from theatre or school? Well, it was very enriching, but it was also very difficult indeed, the shoot. But it was fun. I have to say I enjoyed shooting the film.
Ihre Fragen bitte.
Further questions?
Une question, Régis Andriot, la Gazette de Berlin, une question pour la régisseur.
I have a question for the director.
C'est la nécessité du scénario qui fait que cette situation
Was
est
it
possible, ou
the
est-ce que
script
dans le développement
that made this situation possible, or
du système social en Europe, est-ce que la Suisse est aussi concernée? Est-ce que c'est
do you think that it is imaginable that something like this actually occurs? That a very young adult and a child are entirely without help. Is that possible in our societies here in Europe today?
C'est vrai que le film, au fond, il y a évidemment qu'il y a quelque chose de social et en même temps.
Of course, there's a social dimension to the film.
Et Gilles Torrent, on avait au fond envie d'éviter d'inscrire le film trop dans un film social.
Did, however, decide not to try and make that dimension too strong. Of course, it's the context, but we have made it more into a realistic tale, if you like. And I wanted to make it clear that we were in Switzerland, and if you like, it's a different view of that country, a different presentation. The decor and the story, of course, go hand in hand. The story is tied to the place, and in that region of Switzerland, I was very struck by this fact that there is an industrial lowland, if you like, below the ski resorts up above. Geographically, I think that says something about Switzerland as a country. There is the low Switzerland, if you like, that the tourists pass through on their way up to the ski resorts. There's an upper and a lower Switzerland, if you like, and in that sense the geography was used as a metaphor for life there today.
On est dans une topographie qui est très synthétique.
Yes, it's a very mixed topography. Of course, you've got ski resorts which are up above, and then you've got a more industrialized lowland. But what we've tried to create was this contrast, but we did construct it, if you like. The question is, of course, whether there are such people without help in the Switzerland of today. Well, probably not. Or if there are, it's because they've slipped through the safety net in some isolated cases. But really, it's also a film which is psychological and not just social. The space we created was, however, a determining element. The spatial dimension. Of course, we didn't want the social services or the police to appear in the film, in the story, because essentially the characters, although they're living within a social context, a miserable one, the film is about them as characters. Lea's character, her life is determined by the past, which is not actually made explicit in the film, but she was probably a couple of years older than Casey is now when she became a mother. And she's had to make do. And there is, of course, anger and resentment against the work. Certainly men, or at least the first one, who's the father of Simon. But the two characters, if you like, put themselves into the difficult situation they find themselves in to a large degree.
Je pense que vous êtes
I think you may have been inspired by the Dardenne brothers in Belgium, the Belgian directors. They were perhaps an inspiration, the Dardenne brothers. But living in Switzerland, I think that there's a little bit too much in the film that isn't credible. Selling skis by the roadside, these are things which I don't think you're likely to see. And I think that that undermines the film to a certain degree. Of course it's a fiction, but it really doesn't truly represent Switzerland as we know it. I think it makes it a bit difficult for the audience to watch the film, because it's not a realistic depiction of Switzerland.
Enfin, je sais pas s'il y a une Suisse de référence.
I'm not sure if there is such a
à l'égard de laquelle il faudrait
very specific notion of Switzerland that you need to compare the film to, but it is, of course, a construction,
Après, il y a toutes sortes de films
a
suisses
creation,
qui travaillent toutes sortes de représentations
which can be interpreted in all sorts of ways.
Sociologique ou économique de
The socio-economic realities. Well, of course, I'm Swiss myself. There are all sorts of ways of experiencing life. There are plenty of people in Switzerland who can't afford their health insurance, and others who are buying a pair of skis for 2,000 francs. I mean,
les frères Dardenne n'ont étonnamment
as
pas
to
été
the
une référence.
Dardenne brothers, I do very much like their work.
Je pense que dans mes films, l'imaginaire est extrêmement important, c'est-à-dire que de décoller du réel, quoi. Voilà.
But getting away from reality is actually very important to me. As to selling by the roadside, well, at that moment, my character is almost on the verge of madness. He's ready to do anything to try and keep his place next to his mother, or play the role of the father to some extent, the provider. He has to find the money, and he's terrified of being abandoned. That's what he's trying to avoid. So he tries to keep hold of his mother in any way he can, including, of course, by providing money. I think it's interesting that the story is placed in Switzerland, but perhaps that's not the essence. He invents a life up above in an imaginary world to some extent, with rich parents. This fiction that he creates, this imaginary life, allows him to survive the hard life that he has down below. So the film is very open to the imaginary, to fiction, the life up above. But then again, of course, he desperately is trying to hold on to whatever he has, and he's prepared to jump on a rolling car. It's nothing about Switzerland in this instance. It's about desperation, the desperation of a person. Of course, it may be a fiction, but that sort of desperation does very much exist every day. Romanian television. I followed the discussion in Switzerland, where it is said that there are very few good scripts around. But Mrs. Meyer, after your film Home, you've now found a second very good script to work with. How was it working with Mr. Jacou? And Mr. Jacou, what gave you the idea for this story, which I think is actually very Swiss, I think myself?
Oui, en fait, c'est vraiment une alchimie de deux choses. C'est vrai.
Yes, well, there was a sort of alchemy, if you like, with two elements. You had Home, which was a horizontal film, a family living very near a motorway. with this perception of horizontality, but then I wanted to make a vertical film next. As we were just saying, I need right from the outset with a project that it proceeds organically. I don't set out and say, well, what do I want to do? How am I going to film it? No. I want to work in the field with the image, with the sound, and it all happens as an organic process. So in this case, we had verticality, if you like, as a concept. I found the cable car, of course, is the key image in that sense. In Home, you had this motorway, which became, in the end, almost an abstract concept. It became like a river passing before these people's home. But in this case, we had verticality, and I spoke to Antoine about this idea of a child stealing skis. While we were writing, I was myself in the Jura, just next to the mountains just next to Switzerland, and of course a lot of people go and ski there on Wednesdays or at the weekend, and I was at the time the age of Casey, and everyone, I remember somebody pointing out a boy and saying, take care of your things, he's a thief, or there are thieves around. And I remember this boy. I was very amazed by this character and the fact that he seemed to obviously live between two worlds, determined largely by class. So he was an intruder, and he was in fact banned from the resort eventually. So that's where I got the idea. I mentioned it to Antoine, and then we fairly quickly had the idea that he should have a very, very young mother. So it wasn't going to be about whether he'd get caught so much, or whether the stealing would be revealed. But it was Antoine's idea that he should have a very, very young mother who knows what he's doing and begins, in fact, to
Oui, puis en fait, en
work with him.
Face à face, on travaille l'un en face de l'autre, en pique-nique tout le temps, c'est horrible. Et
well, we had to work very, very closely together. We didn't have an independent writing period, if you like, and then subsequently an adaptation period. I think you write a film, you don't write a film script as such. There's always you work together with the director throughout. And you test scenes and you work with things, and it's much more fun that way. It takes time. You spend a lot of time together. You test things out. Of course, the idea is not for the film script to be read at the end of the day. It's there to be acted out.
Bonjour, Anne Charmant de l'Agence France Presse. Je voudrais pas mettre mal à l'aise Casey, mais
I don't want to make Casey uncomfortable, but I would like to go back to the first question we heard. Could you say, Mrs. Meyer, how you cast him, how you met him? He's, of course, very impressive. It's the second time we've seen your colleague here in 5 days, so there's a very different world. Versailles, and we had the first time, and now something very different. So could you say something about the mother figure as well?
Donc Casey, en fait, c'est le petit garçon de Home.
Casey was the boy in Home.
Mon premier long métrage. Et c'est vrai que je crois qu'on a dû voir tous les enfants de Suisse romande, quoi. Vraiment.
We, however, saw almost every child on the face of the earth. There was all sorts of casting, even in the road, by the roadside.
C'est vrai que j'ai eu un, je dois l'avouer, j'ai eu un.
And I have to say, well, I more or less fell in love with
et en fait,
Casey.
Sur le premier film, sur Home, on a fait un énorme
In
travail.
the case of Home, we worked very hard indeed, not on the script so much. But in depth, we worked in depth. The difficulty was when he had lines. It wasn't always easy. So we tried to work on a day-to-day basis, not so much on the film's actual lines and dialogue. That we did at the very, very end. But we prepared in an intuitive fashion rather than using techniques. I tried to see, how can I get Casey to say something in an authentic, genuine way? He was 8 at the time. When an 8-year-old says something, recites something, then it's fixed in the mind, and they always say it in the same way after that. So it was pointless trying to get him to repeat the lines from the film and to change the way he was saying this. That wasn't going to work. So we went out to eat a lot together, and I wanted to sort of point out, in the course of conversation, the sort of the way in which I wanted him to be able to say other things. There was, of course, a lot of physical work involved. Sometimes I would film him for half an hour and then tell him, look at the camera as much as you want now, but afterwards you won't look at it at all. You'll never look at the camera. And we did. There were experiments of that sort, and then by the time we got to the end, it was working perfectly well. He could say almost anything in front of the camera very naturally. So that was the context of home. I wanted to take that further now. And in this case, I was able to work with him as I would have done with any professional. Because we had, of course, the previous experience up our sleeves. So there was first the physical work involved in the stealing of the skis, burying them in the snow, counting the money, the bills. He's very, of course, stressed by not having money. So we practiced all those, how he looks at what he's going to steal. We looked at what was at stake in each scene, as you would have done with a professional, usually with Antoine. So Casey really has become a professional actor. He, of course, wanted to be Simon to the extent that is possible. He's also played Serge Gainsbourg as well in another film. Well, I was here not so long ago with a very different film, indeed. I do like to make very different films, very different characters. With Ursula's film, the first time I read the film script, I wasn't entirely sure how to approach the character of Louise. It's a very, very difficult role, a fairly violent role. One doesn't, in principle, sympathize with her. I had to find her reality and her human side. I talked, of course, in depth with Ursula and Antoine about the character, and we tried to define her psychological traits. But it was certainly not easy all along. Now, I can say I have a lot of affection for Ursula's film. I mean that. I'm very, very pleased to have worked with you. She's very, very intelligent in her direction of actors. And the character now is there, and I think that one does manage to sympathize with her to some extent. or to understand her. Yes, that's what was at stake, really. How could we make this mother sympathetic? I always said, you've got to remember what you've been through when you're playing the role, or what the character has been through. You've got to bear that in mind throughout. The lie that the child is her brother allows her, of course, to carry on. But what we wanted to achieve is that she isn't judged. We wanted her humane, weak side to appear, as well as her rougher sides. And I think that's what we worked towards. Yes, with Ursula, it was a work or an art of composition in quite a lot of depth. I like the fact that my character is, if you like, socially, in principle, very far away from myself. I have a question for Agnès Godard. This is, of course, a fiction, but in a very authentic environment in the Swiss mountains. Tell me about the camera work. How did you mix the documentary, if you like, element and the fictional element? How did you approach the work in the mountains?
Je ne vois pas la personne qui m'a posé la question.
I don't see the person who asked the question.
J'ai procédé par... J'avais travaillé sur Home.
I had worked on Home before.
C'était un film pour lequel le décor avait été entièrement
construit. In that case, we had an entirely constructed
pour une approche,
set.
Je dirais un petit peu conceptuelle du tournage. Évidemment, là, c'était tout à fait
and
différent.
Now we're in a totally different situation because we had a natural set or setting.
Un an avant le tournage.
And about a year before we shot the film, we spent some time, although I'm not a skier and I don't know Switzerland very well, but we spent some time getting to know the place long before the shoot. And that sunk in, if you like. And as Ursula has said, it's a vertical film. That's the key concept. Over and above that, why did we make this digitally? Well, we wanted the texture of the digital images to be, if you like, to create a slight gap or distance between the natural images. You would get an analog. So we wanted, if you like, a counterpoint. We wanted to take the world of dreams, the upper world, the wealthy world, and then we wanted that to be bright, but then we wanted the lower world to be dark, in contrast, with a different register. That was the basic idea. We wanted to depart slightly from naturalism, a naturalistic approach, so as to focus not so much on the social dimensions, but on the drama, the family drama or tragedy playing out. Obviously, it's a key relationship that we're dealing with, the mother-child relationship.
On a fait des essais sur place.
We carried out a lot of tests and trials on the spot in order to find the form we wanted. We didn't want a documentary style. We wanted very much to select what is shown and what is not. If you like, it's contrived in that sense. And then you've got the persons and their faces, bodies, which are, if you like, the raw material of the film. I hope I've answered your question.
Et puis aussi l'idée de commence c'est vrai de justement quelqu'un parlait du IMAT film et c'est vrai que
someone mentioned IMAT film,
on commence dans des toilettes en 2 minutes, il y a 2 séquences de toilettes et on est dans la montagne dans les
we've got you're in the mountains, but of course we focus on 2 scenes in tiny toilet cubicles.
Une forme de concision, c'était partir du principe que moi je suis partie du
principe que
cette histoire
wanted to be concise. The principle was that this story could only exist in this particular geographical context with the upper and the lower world. So I think the story very much emanated from the geography, emanated from the place. And that made it possible for us to find concise images which don't necessarily need lengthy development as you would expect in a more naturalistic or documentary style film. Yes, about a year before we shot the film, I did spend about a month in such a ski resort. Of course, when you go to such a resort, you don't realize that there's a whole sort of underworld there below stairs servicing the resort. Antoine joined me for a few days, so did Agnès and Gilles Thoreau. And we were confronted with what we had created, except we hadn't really created it, of course. Stealing and selling by the roadside does exist, yes, even in Switzerland. And although I'm in an imaginary tale, it is, of course, an imaginary tale, but I do want a very solid basis to work on. I don't want to be giving any old story in any old details. No, it has to be rooted in and have a solid base. So in this case, the world was that the parallel world to the holiday world, the seasonal work and so on. We know exactly what to expect in a ski resort. You've got all those ski lifts and everything is made smooth and functional for the visitors, for the tourists. But beyond that world, just below it, there is a much more chaotic world full of people who are constantly on the move.
Thank you very much. Alessandro Giannini from Brazil. I want to hear from the actors, please, about the preparation. You talked a little bit about the characters and everything, but I want to hear from you the preparation you did between you and the guy. But from then, please.
Alors, la préparation, on a...
As to the preparation, we did, of course, rehearse with Casey.
Je me souviens que c'était donc, comme je disais avant, comme ce personnage, je le trouvais très dur.
As I said, I found my own character very difficult, very hard, and I found it very difficult to like her or love her. It was difficult at the beginning.
À incarner ce personnage.
Really acting this role, and it was new, certainly for me, to work with a child.
C'est vrai que ça change complètement parce que il est dans une vérité immédiate.
Things change when you work with a child because they live in a much more immediate world, immediate reality, and
quoique peut-être pas vraiment, mais peut-être plus dans une composition.
I was in a slightly different dimension, a more composite one. So it was very, very good exercise for me. And Casey is a great actor.
C'était vraiment une belle expérience.
It was a wonderful experience working with him.
Non, et puis on a passé du temps ensemble.
We certainly spent a lot of time together.
Ici, voilà, on se promenait.
We went for walks.
Casey, vielleicht sagst du noch etwas.
Bah, faire ce film avec Léa, en tout cas, c'est une grande expérience.
Well, it was great for me as well, and I learned a lot as well, not from Lea and from Ursula.
Vraiment, je remercie ces deux grandes
I'd
personnes.
like to thank these two wonderful people.
C'était pas un tournage facile.
It wasn't easy. It really wasn't easy all the time.
Mais bon, très sympa.
Danke.
Oui, alors je fais école, pas sur le tournage, mais...
Yes, I do go to school,
je loupe l'école.
but of course I miss some. I had to miss some while we were filming.
J'ai à peu près une semaine de repos pour pouvoir bien.
I had to rest up for a week when we'd finished and prepare my return to school.
Puis je dois tout rattraper. Donc voilà.
And I had to catch up, basically. The questions are off mic, unfortunately.
J'ai 13 ans, puis j'ai dû refaire la 6e.
I'm
4 mois de tournage.
13. I had to take 4 months off for the shoot. So, of course, I'm a bit behind, but I think it's worth it.
Bitte schön. Ich möchte gerne die beiden Produzenten noch fragen, Frau Waldburg und
I'd like to ask the producers
können Sie sich erinnern, als Sie zum ersten Mal mit dem Drehbuch von Ursula Meyer konfrontiert wurden?
When you first saw the film script,
besonders an diesem Stoff fasziniert? Und vielleicht noch eine zweite Frage.
What interested you? And then the shoot in a ski resort in the mountains. Did that mean there were certain unusual logistical difficulties, or was it all perfectly straightforward?
En tout cas, ich kann sagen, was die
What I can say about the logistics is that it was rather difficult to get, for example, enough snow. Last year there wasn't enough snow. 9 weeks. In 9 weeks it snowed once. So we had to often go higher and higher and higher to get any snow. And that's certainly one of the problems we had.
Oui, en ce qui concerne le scénario, donc moi j'avais produit Home de Ursula.
I produced Ursula's film Home, and even at the time she mentioned her desire to make a film in Switzerland.
Voilà, d'une taille un peu inférieure à Home, c'était compliqué.
Home was, if you like, a very complicated idea with the motorway and so on, but this was in a way simpler. A petty thief trying to find his place between an upper and a lower world, his role of brother and son at the same time. And we developed it together then with Antoine Jacot and Gilles Torrent. But in that sense I can't give you a reaction to say how I reacted when I first read it, because I was part of the process of its creation from the outset. Though it went through various versions, we spent time together in Verbier, scouting. So we were involved during the writing phase and the cutting, editing phase. Changes were made along the way. It's a long process, an ongoing process of dialectic, if you like, between
citer pour vous dire
the makers and
vous
the
avez vu
producers,
la structure dramatique du film repose quand même sur
saw
une
that
révélation
the
qui arrive à peu
drama,
près
of course,
à la moitié
turns
du
on the
film.
revelation more or less
Bien
halfway
évidemment,
through
notre souhait, ça serait que les spectateurs puissent vivre le début
what
du
the real
film
relationship is
en
between the
pensant
characters.
que Louise et Simon sont frères et sœurs.
You could get through
Vous
the
avez vu d'ailleurs
film
que le
believing
titre
that
international du film est
the
Sister.
characters are brother
Je sais que
and
c'est très difficile
sister,
de
and
demander à des
indeed the English
journalistes de parler d'un
title
film,
is Sister.
voilà,
I know it's very
en
difficult
cachant une partie de
to ask
l'histoire,
journalists to
mais si
talk
vous pouvez
about
nous
a
aider
film
dans ce sens-là, on vous en sera
without
très
revealing
reconnaissant,
the
parce que je crois que
truth.
ça fait vraiment,
We'd
vraiment
be very, very
partie
grateful
après
if you
du-
could
voilà,
avoid
du
revealing
plaisir et
the
de l'émotion du
denouement,
spectateur.
because I think it does change the way that an audience will see the film.
Die Dame und Sie dann als letzte.
Alexandra Schüler von Backstars Radio.
From Backstars Radio.
Meine Frage geht auch Richtung
I have a
Kameraarbeit,
question
wurde zum Teil
relating
schon
to the
von Frau
camera
Godard
work,
beantwortet, an
which,
Ursula Meyer.
but I'd like to address it to
Sie
the
haben
director.
schon sehr betont, dass Ihnen die räumliche Darstellung sehr wichtig
You've
war,
said
und
that
Sie haben
obviously the
sich
space
mit
and
Frau
place
Godard,
was
Frau
very
geholt, mit der
important
Sie
to
schon
you, and with
zusammengearbeitet haben.
Mrs.
Können Sie vielleicht
Godard,
ein
you
bisschen
were
was über die
working with someone you'd
Zusammenarbeit
worked
sagen,
with
wie sich die
before. Could you say
gestaltet hat?
something
Und Frau
about
Godard,
your
Sie bekommen in
collaboration?
2
And
oder 3
Mrs.
Wochen
Godard, in
Preis,
2 or
einen
3
Kamerapreis verliehen.
weeks, you will get, you will be
Und
receiving a
wird sich 2 Tage
prize.
intensiv mit Ihrem Werk beschäftigen.
And
Welche Bedeutung hat das für Sie?
I'd like to say, I'd like to ask you what that means to you.
Tu go ahead. Non, travailler avec Agnès, moi j'ai juste.
Well, working with Agnès,
formidable.
all I can say is that it's wonderful.
Voilà, c'est vrai on s'est rencontrés sur
We
Home.
met on the making of Home.
Voilà, Agnès a une intelligence rare, mais
she has rare intelligence.
Voilà, on parle pas que de cinéma, on parle de philosophie.
We don't just talk about films. We talk about politics, philosophy. In a way, of course, our film is rather more. It has a very strong political dimension. It's more political than it is social, in my opinion. She has a lot of experience, and despite our difference in the level of experience, because I'm a beginner, Agnès always wants to be fair to the film, and she listens. She does really listen to the director and tries to capture what he or she intends. It's wonderful.
Travailler avec Ursula, ça a été.
Working with Ursula.
Finalement, ça a été assez facile.
It was actually very easy. After a certain amount of time, after a certain input, it becomes easy.
Quand elle donne un scénario à lire,
when she gives you a film script to read,
fournir 300 parce qu'elle a dû en écrire 600.
Well, you know that if you've got 100 pages, she probably wrote 300 or 600.
On est nourri.
It's a very rich texture. You've got a lot of material to use in devising the images. And becoming part of the narrative.
Voilà, c'est ça qui est formidable. Et avec une demande, en effet, un souci de.
I had a lot of material to work with, and at the same time, very specific guidance as to the sort of cinematographic register that she wanted. So, in that sense, I had a lot of useful pointers.
La métamorphose de quelque chose qui existe
in making something that exists in words into pictures.
Voilà, on les trouve.
You have to work, of course, with the text. And her text is full of the sort of information that a cinematographer needs. We had you have to give, if you like, the skeleton flesh. We spent a lot of time sharing our views on films as well, which may not have been in any way relevant to this film, or certainly weren't models for it. But but which, of course, allowed us to share our passion for film. The Marburg Prize is something I find it difficult to talk about because I'm very touched to be receiving it. Those who selected me, well, I need to meet them, really. I need to take a step back, and I can say perhaps more later on. But I'm very, very happy indeed to be able to present various films I've worked on in this context, films which matter to me in terms of my cinematographic accomplishments. And they are, of course, what one wants to work on in the future. I have been impressed recently how often young children, and in particular boys, have been used as mirrors to reflect our world in films recently. So the question is, why is it that we seem to feel that children can tell us what's going on in our world?
Ist das für mich als Deutsche
fast
schon ein wenig platt gewesen. Wir haben die
German, I find, of course, we know we have an upper world, a lower world, an underclass, an upper class, and so on. I found this almost too obvious. Obviously, class is more than just money. It's not that only the money that matters to the boy in the film, but what he can buy with it. And he's looking for his place in that world. But what about the learning process? Perhaps you could have shown also the pain of those who lose something that are stolen, things that are stolen. I think this is very one-dimensional. He can't perhaps learn on that basis. On the one occasion that he's caught, again, the sympathy all remains with him.
Bitte Mikrofon, wenn überhaupt.
At no point is it made clear to the boy what it means to someone to lose something that one may be attached to, and it has nothing to do with money, but it has to do with the attachment of people to their belongings. A child losing his skis or whatever. That other side of the story never comes across.
Non mais je sais pas si je vous ai bien compris, mais enfin je crois que vous avez dit avec beaucoup de justesse qu'il devient au fond un chef de famille.
But I think you're saying, of course, that
pour nous qu'il devienne un chef
the boy becomes the head of the family. He has to grow up, but he becomes more and more monstrous, if you like, as a figure within the couple he forms with Louise. And there is a form of resolution to our minds, and the fact that he finds a new role for himself vis-à-vis his mother. So that's what we were interested in. We're not so interested in what stealing means in moral terms to him, or how he understands that. He wants a more normal, if you like, relationship with his mother. That was much more important to us, the development of that relationship and how he can find his place next to his mother.
Bitte überhaupt.
No longer as brother, but as child. I think that the lady was disturbed by the fact that he never learns that what he takes from people may be something of meaning to them and can be a great loss. That is the dimension of stealing that isn't there. I'm afraid we can't take this further now because the next press conference begins in 5 minutes. Thank you all very much for coming in. And I wish everyone a good day.